Hi, this is Kim Pinkney and welcome to my channel. And I am doing Catwoman, and this was a tutorial. I didn't want to just do a speed draw. Okay, so I'm holding up a dark brown because I don't use black on the regular. This is a light brown or tan. It's tan pretty much because you can see from both ends. I got peach. Got a lime green. I'm going to use that on the eyes. I really don't know what color Catwoman's eyes are. And some various other colors, and I'll add more as I go. I'm using white right now, and I just want to maintain the highlights. And since it's coated with baby oil, and it's almost dry, I had it under a fan for about two hours, and it's almost dry, but it's still transparent. So right now I'm pretty much looking at my source image, and I'm adding highlights where I think would be on Catwoman's face according to my source image. It may not be exactly the same, but it's a good guide. So I'm just making little circles. I'm not pressing down really hard. If I find that none of it really, if I can't see it, I just keep working it and working it gently, and it comes out. You're not in any danger of ripping your paper. This paper here is from the Art with Edge book, and it's pretty sturdy. It can handle pretty much this medium here. So I'm pretty much just adding where I think the common areas are that I think the light would hit it, around the cheekbones, in front of and I'm thinking that the light is coming from a particular area, so I'm going to start adding things where I think it might be either darker or lighter. Some of the typical dark spots are like in the near the eye sockets. My source image was pretty washed out. She was very, very fair-skinned, and so I am pretty much just adding the white onto it. And in places where I think it's going to be super light for the color that I'm going to be using, I add a white on there, and like the cheekbones up at the top, and I'm showing it to you. You can barely see it. You can barely see it. And my source image, she had bangs, so I really don't know what's going on with the her forehead. Okay, and I'm just adding some to the chin. And it was like the forward part of her chin had tones to it, and where her jawline meets the mask, it had some color, but in between it was very super light. Now, if you don't get all the places where you're going to add highlights, it's no big deal. You can always come back to it. On the side of her face, it's pretty pink, so I'm adding some extra white in there. I'm going to be using bubble gum on, for really pink areas. I'm going to be using peach and brown to get the brown areas, and I'll be using, what is it called? Not mauve, taupe. I'll be using taupe for some of the lighter brown areas. Now I'm wondering where the light source is coming from, because I'm thinking that these goggles, since they stick out further from her face, are going to cast a shadow. So I'm going to have the shadow go in the same direction as I see some of the shadows on her, like where her nose is. That's the biggest indication of where the light source is coming from. If it's casting a shadow on the other side, then the side that I'm working on right now is more of the is getting the light. You can also tell by the lips, so it's almost like a side is hitting it from the right side. Now, also another thing about baby oil is when I use my pencils, they come on really smooth. You can see them, you don't see the lines, like if you were drawing a line, you don't see the lines so much. I don't use a lot of the dark brown on her face because she's really super light. So I'm just adding little touches where I think I see the dark color the most. That was underneath her cheekbones and a little bit in her eyes. I gave a little color to the eyebrow. And right now I'm just kind of making it more of a hazel green look with the lime green. I might even throw another green in there. And I usually have my pencils nearby. And so I'll be pulling pencils left and right in a little bit. So I'm just filling it in. Now the thing about coloring with these color pencils with this coated with baby oil, they don't have to be super sharp. You can get away with it having a dull tip. The only thing is that you can't get into the super tiny areas. So when I'm doing like a mass area, like if I'm doing like her cheekbones, you know, big areas, I don't worry so much about it being sharp. Besides, if it's super sharp, you're going to see a lot of pencil lines. And if you're going for a more smoother look, and that's what baby oil gives you, it gives you more of a nice smooth look. And it goes on almost like a Prismacolor. Prismacolors are really super smooth, and it's just like working with butter. It's nice. And most of these pencils are pretty hard. They're very vibrant, so sometimes you need to just add a little bit of a different color to get them to be a little darker. Now I put a little bit of the bubble gum where her tear duct is, but since it's not that big, you won't be able to get like some highlights in there. I'm also using a white colored pencil in her eyes, but I'll also be adding a little bit of a shadow with the gray. Now this is where it would be nice if it was really super sharp, because then you don't have to worry about it over coloring. When it's coated with baby oil, you can't erase, not really well. Especially when it's still wet, it'll leave just a residue. It's disgusting and it's hard to cover up. So it helps to be precise with what you're doing. And I mean, it's not any big deal if you make a mistake, because you can always work with it some way, some shape or form. It's not the end of the world. Okay, so now I'm just doing a little bit more of the coloring. And in this position, she's kind of looking up at us, so I'm not adding any more eyelashes just yet. Eyelashes, little fine details like that, they're good to have with a sharper pencil. You got to be careful not to over sharpen these pencils, because sometimes they crack. They're not the greatest of quality as far as staying in. I've had like that tan, it just kept falling apart. It cracked. So I had to use another end. Okay, so I pulled out green to add just a little bit more green. I just found it was a little bit vibrant. And you'll find that with these pencils, they're nice and they're vibrant. So what I usually do is I usually have about 2 or 3 colors. I have a light color, a dark color, and a mid-tone color. Like it'll be 3 different shades of green, 3 different shades of blue, 3 different shades to help me with the skin tone. And it adds a little bit of depth. And when I need to darken it up, I use the opposite on the color wheel, the complementary color. So like with red, green is its complement, and both colors, when they're side by side, they bring out the brightness of each other. But when they're mixed together, they darken each other. So a good rule of thumb, if it's warm and you need to darken it up, use a cool color. If it's a cool color and you need to darken it up, use a warm color. Alrighty, so right now I am using peach and tan on her nose. Any of the other browns that I have would be way too dark. I am using a bit of an orange because her nostril seems to be a different shade than the rest of her face. So I just use a hint of that. And then I'm coming back with the light brown and the peach. And I'll be alternating between the two. And you want to keep alternating between the two or between your colors. It's like I'm doing the side of her face, but it's more, and I have to look at it to see, is it more pink or is it more peach? And that's how I make my decision on which one I'm using. It's that stupid color. Alrighty, so this is Catwoman, so I added some bags under her eyes because I figure she is a thief that works at night and has to play the role during the day, so I gave her some bags under her eyes, even though my source image didn't really have any pronounced bags under her eyes. They're not really super obvious, but it also, adding little details to a face, sometimes you'll find it on your source image, it gives it more of a character, gives it more life, instead of just coloring a flat image. And you'll see that as I'm coloring, I'm not being super light, but I am coloring light because I don't have to press down. The oil seems to bring out the pencils. And I will work in layers where I'll lay down one color, like right now I'm laying down salmon. And then I'll look at it and see, is it too pink for her face? And if I do find it too pink, and I have to make judgment calls, is it more pink or more peach? And sometimes I just alternate between the two until I get the color that I'm looking for. And it's good to work like that. Instead of just thinking that you have one color that you're using. There's actually 3 colors on here because you've got white, the salmon, and the peach working together. Now if I find that I make it too dark, I can always add more white and that will lighten it up. And then on her cheeks, her cheekbones, I'm using more of the salmon, but I'm going to lighten it up with some, either the bubble gum or with white. And it goes from like that pink bubble gumish color on the top of her cheekbones, going towards her lips, you know, like when you smile. And I kind of give her a little bit of a smirk in this too. And then it goes further down into more of a brown tone, and I'll be showing you that as well. But right now I'm using salmon. And you notice that I'm not going over the entire thing in one whole color. I'm doing patches of it because your face isn't, when you look at a face from a photograph, the light changes where, like the person could be peach altogether, but the light is changing where that peach is falling. And just to show that when it's wet like this, it's really super difficult to add. It's not hard to add tones, and it does become transparent. That's Bristol paper that I have that I'm using underneath. and it works great with baby oil. But if I wanted to protect my picture, I could always put like a baby oil covered Bristol sheet, let it dry a little bit, and I could just trace it and transfer my image. But at this point, I'm just pretty much, I've coated it, and then I'll probably just let it dry. And I think I left in testing pencil onto the face. I use the goggles, and I try a little bit of maybe a yellow or an orange on there, just to show. It just becomes awkward if you can apply your pencils to your face when it's wet, but it's hard to work with because it's so wet. The pencils will sit right up on top. They will, I don't want to say they won't mix, but it won't sit right. It's just like, and then when your hand goes across it, there's baby oil on it. It's just better to wait like an hour or so. You don't want to wait too long. For the Superman one, I waited a day, and it seemed to be just fine. I don't think I had that one under a fan. I just let it dry naturally. With this one, I had it under a fan, a really high-powered fan, for like 2 hours, and this thing was almost completely dry. And you don't really want it to be completely dry when you're working on it, because you'll start to see pencil lines. And as we go through, because it's going to be like an hour as I'm working on this, you'll start to see lines form. You might see it more in part 2. But as your hand goes across, you start picking up some of the oils, and it just becomes a mess. But at this stage right here, it's pretty easy to work with. It's not wet, and it's not too dry. So just in between. And here I am just alternating between the two of salmon and peach. And it gives you that nice warm orange. It's like a nice warm orange that you just don't have like right out the box. And then under her nose, she's got like, what is that called? Like a septum. I just add a hint of the septum, and a little bit with the gray. And then I'm adding a little bit of gray on the other side of her nose, just to have the shadow extend just a little further. And that adds a little bit of depth too. If it's too dark, and I found it was just a little too dark, I wanted to lighten it up a little bit. So I ended up lightening it up either with white or like brown or peach. It's like a more peach gray. And I'm just working it in. You don't want it to look like a mustache on women. So with this baby oil on it, it's nice and slick. You don't have those awkward lines. And when they do form, you can always rub them out with a blending stub, or blend them out with the blending stub. And you'll see that I'm not using my blending stub until I have a good bit of colored pencil on there. Okay. And a really good rule of thumb is to also keep your white pencil clean. So like these areas where my highlights are really bright, you don't want to mess it up by having brown pop into an area that is not supposed to have it. It'll throw off the picture a lot, and it's hard to get rid of, depending on how hard you or how much you've added on there. And also at this stage, you don't see a lot of dust from the pencils. Sometimes when you color, either with crayons or even sometimes with colored pencils, you see like this dust come off of, like little crumbles come off of your pencils, and you have to wipe them away. And when you have baby oil, you don't have that problem, not until it starts to dry. You do still have it with crayons though. Crayons just flake. That's what they do. But they can also be blended out with a blending stub with this baby oil technique here. Not so much when they're dry though. I've been doing, and here I am just adding some bubble gum to her cheeks because the front of her cheeks are pretty bright. There's a hint of it on her nose. And there's a good portion on the side right there of her other cheekbone, the one that you barely see. So I add a little bit there. Just in case that I thought that maybe it might be too faint, so I would add more, just an additional layer. And I even throw a little bit of red in there just to give it a little bit of a pop of a reddish tone. But I'll be doing that like on the nose. Even though my source image didn't have like a bright red nose or anything like that, I just added that because I just wanted to have a balance of warmth on her face instead of it being like a cool brown or a cool peach color. Alrighty, now I'm using a bit of tan on the side of her nose. Like I said, my source image, she has very fair skin, and her nose the shadow on her nose is pretty much almost non-existent. It's just barely there, so I just barely put some of the tan on. I try to find source images that have a good mix of color play on the face. I don't want one that's too washed out, and I don't want one that is just unrealistic tones. I did one where the tones were so it was the character that I was drawing from, the source image, it had like a blue cast on it, but it was like a blue gray cast, and when I looked at it, it just looked really super bad. So you kind of have to use your best judgment on what kind of color tones you want to use and what source image you need to use. But what I do like to do is get like maybe 3 or 4 different colors, and then assign them different parts of the face. So like I would use maybe a deep dark blue for the shadows, a light blue for the midtones, and maybe just white for the highlights. You can get away with that doing the same exact thing. You can do monochromatic pictures, or like this one assignment I had when I was in college. You have to use you were tasked to use unrealistic tones for the face. So it can be a lot of fun trying different things. So I'm still using a bit of the salmon, bringing out her nostrils a bit, giving a little bit more definition to the nose. My source image is really small. I would say it was like maybe 2 inches by 2 inches. So it was really tiny, seeing the details of the face. And I don't usually like to choose pictures like that because I do want to see the face. And then there are times when I just use it as a reference. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, so the shadow should be hit like this. It should be lighter here, darker there. Nothing like I'm trying to copy the person completely. Excuse me. Okay, so I'm just working her nose. And you can tell even when I'm using long strokes, you can't see that those streaks like you would with a regular color pencil on dry paper. This baby oil, it just seems to blend themselves together. When you put another color on top of it, it just merges with the other one, and it's just really super soft. So when you're at a stage like this is a big area, so my pencils don't have to be needlepoint sharp. And this is where a dull pencil comes in very well. But when I do want to get a nice chisel look, I do want it just as, I want to have a tip to it. And I'm using a bit of the mahogany just to try to bring out her cheekbone a little bit, because it's brown up to that certain point, and then it stops being brown, or it stops being a dark brown, and it goes into a lighter brown as I go towards her jaw. And then, but above it, it's got that blush, that pink blush to it. So I'm alternating between bubblegum, peach, and light brown, maybe tan. So I'm going to keep adding a little bit more pink. I guess as I take a look at my source image and I see where the pink is. Now, if I'm having problems with a certain area, like it's not coming out the way I want it to, I move on to a different area. That's why you don't see me staying in one spot, working it until it just pops out. I like to have a balance. And if something doesn't seem to be working, like sometimes it could be the oil, or just your eyes just get saturated with color, that it's hard to tell what's going on. So give your eyes a break, work on something else. If your hand starts to get tired, work on something else on the picture. Just to give your hands a break from doing the same motions over and over again. So that's why you would see me going from one area to another, and then as your eyes adjust to your picture and it changes, you see something else that might pop up and catch your eye that you missed before. And then I'm pretty much looking at things around her face, because of the way the light hits it, one side may be darker than the other, one may be more highlight than the other, and the colors on her face change because of the planes of the face. So I'm constantly looking, kind of like in a triangle formation. Is this darker than this? Is this supposed to be lighter than that? And then I adjust it to see how things work. So I'm kind of working around in a circle type of area, just seeing how, like, if the left cheekbone is darker than the right cheekbone, is the nose supposed to be lighter or darker than the left side of her face, things like that. I just see how things are working with each other, because you could be working and making a part of the face way too dark. Or leaving a part way too light. I had done another picture and a teacher kept telling me, go darker, go darker. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if I go any darker, this is going to ruin the picture. That is going to be the taupe. The taupe straddles the, that line between the gray and the brown. It's like a grayish brown. And it looks great. It's the color that I actually needed for her nose, instead of trying to keep working back and forth with peach and with salmon, trying to get that right color. But that taupe works really good. But as I was saying, that she doesn't have much of a shadow beneath her lip like maybe even Superman didn't really have a shadow beneath his lip. But anyway, I digress. She had told me that it was too dark, too light. No, I was thinking it would be too dark. She's like, go darker. And just seeing how it turned out pretty good. Sometimes your eyes just get used to seeing things in a certain way, but it doesn't hurt to step away from it, take some advice from a professional or a person who knows what they're talking about. But it was like, I thought the woman was crazy. I'm like, why go darker? She was trying to get me to bring out more richness of the face, to bring out more tones of the face. So don't be afraid to go a little bit darker than what you're used to. So what I end up doing is straddling the fence on that one and just adding a little bit more of, an extra layer, like on the left side of her face. I just give her a little bit more. And I'm emphasizing the bangs, the eye bags a little bit. It seems to give her eyes a little bit more intensity. And one of the darker spots that you can always count on it being dark is right there in the corner of the eye, right above the tear duct and whatnot. So I'm darkening that up right there. Usually it's dark beneath the chin. That's why I was kind of like looking at her chin and looking at my source image, and I'm like, okay, she doesn't have any shadows there. I'm just gently working my peach towards the mask, and then adding the shadow of the goggles. So at this point, I know that my hand is going to keep traveling across the paper. So what I did is I got a sheet protector, just a regular old sheet protector, and I stuck my hand under it. I like the sheet protector versus a white piece of paper, only because that you can still see beneath it. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out that where the shadow is coming from. And I'm figuring it's going towards her left eye, that is going to cast a shadow beneath that. Now, it doesn't hurt to get a source image of someone wearing goggles, especially if they're wearing them in the same kind of light and casting the same kind of shadows. You can see how it's changes the color of their skin. In this case, I just made them a little bit darker, made her skin a little bit darker underneath, because I figure it's not going to be a hard shadow on there. I could have gone a little bit further down, like more towards her eyebrow, going at an angle. But I'm like, nah, just leave it about right here. That looks about right. And so I just emphasize a lot of that. But also, you want to keep in mind that when you're doing your drawings or your colorings, when you have a shadow, there's going to be a corresponding light. Okay, so always keep that in mind when you're doing your pictures. And I should do a tutorial on that. But like you can see on her nose, it's dark on one side, but it gets lighter as we get closer to the other side of her nose. And I just added a little bit of a tip to her nose. My source image really didn't have it. And it's okay to deviate from your source image. You don't have to follow it completely. Just take what you need from it and then, add what you want to it. And because the eye is in a socket, it's going to be darker than or set back into the face. So there'll be a shadow between the eyebrow and the cheekbone. So that's one of the things that you can always count on. It just depends on where the light is coming from. But because it's your eye is a ball sitting in a hole, and it's set back into that hole, you're gonna have some shadows. Okay, I did add a little bit of eyelashes to her, just to emphasize the eyes a little bit, but I really didn't need to. And then I added an eye crease as well, even though I don't see it on the other side. It's pretty much obscured. And you can add whatever makeup you want. You can either base it off of someone else's makeup. Like I like people who do the unicorn makeup and stuff like that, really dramatic eyes. I like to try to capture that as well. I've got some source images of something like that. But it's good to have like an area for source images. So I recommend Pinterest. I recommend using the Google Drive. That way you can store images of things that might help you in the future. Or just collecting old magazines, ones that have really good faces or poses, and you can always tap into that as well, and that would help you do your colorings. It'll help you place the colors in an accurate area, or more realistic area. I don't always recommend coloring from someone else's drawing, because when you do, they may be wrong, and that throws you off, because doing a drawing of a drawing, something is going to get missed. So I rather would draw from life or color from something that's real, something that you can look at, not someone else's coloring so much, especially if they're wrong. I've seen one person do some colors and it's like, oh gosh, no. No. But had she have used a reference, just a face, that would have helped her a lot with her color. It wouldn't have looked so harsh. She could still be fierce, but not inaccurate. But you know what? That's her book. She colors it the way she wants. So I respect that. And you'll find different ways that you'll color. Sometimes you won't use a source image. Sometimes you'll just color from memory, just remembering certain things. But maybe it's darker under the nose. Maybe it's darker under the chin. Oh, not the chin, but rather under the lips where it curls underneath. You'll recognize some of the places where shadows should be. Okay, I got kind of miffed at the lips. Look at all that black on the lips. It's like they took it away from me. It's like, ah. So what I decided to do was take my white pencil, and her lips are more of a coral color in the source image, and so I start to add some of the ridges and creases and whatnot onto her lips. And I also wanted to leave some white highlight above the lips. When you look at some pictures and you look at people's lips, if they don't have a whole bunch of makeup on, you can see like a white highlight, almost like a ridge above the lip line and around the lips. And so what I tried to do is, and there's my little smirk, little half smile. It's like, yeah, I got confidence. And I took that line and just traced it around the lips. And so and I added a little bit on the side too. I think I even throw in a dimple as well. I'm like, yeah, I got this. Okay, So I'm working from my, because the top of the lip, the upper lip is usually in shadow or a little bit darker than the lower lip. And you can see this when you look at some really nice high-res photos where you can see that the upper lip is darker than the lower lip, except when they're wearing makeup. And sometimes it could be hit or miss. Sometimes it's brighter, but the lower lip catches more of the light, and that's why it becomes lighter than the upper lip. And so I've just add little creases, little lines. This is where it's good to have a sharpened pencil. But it's like they took away my lips with this darkness. So what I ended up doing was taking, like I said, I took a white colored pencil, went into those the dark parts. I've done something similar to that on a Batman picture. On his cape, I saw that there was just this big black splotch on his cape, and it's like, come on, there's got to be something else going on there. And that's one of the downsides I have with this Art with Edge book, is that they fill in a lot of the blacks that we could have been filling in ourselves. But you know, this is what it's like to work with an inker, someone else who inks the stuff. But anyway, I digress. I decided to make her lips a little redder, just to add a little bit more redness or warmth to the face. So I take out a red pencil, and I will be enhancing the lips. But I also look at different parts of the face. And okay, now I'm going to use my blending stub just a little bit. And when you use your blending stub, look at me, I'm always jumping all over the place. But before I do, I'm going to do this. You know, sometimes when you just take a step back, there's the red, you just take a step back and you look at your stuff and you start to see things that you're missing, things that would look cool, you know, that would look good. I decided to add like a little bit of highlights to her lips. If you have one of those gel pens, white gel pens, that'd be all right to use if you want to give it that really super highlight. But with me, I try to anticipate where I'm going to have highlights, and that way I don't have to have a gel pen. And sometimes it looks distracting when you have too many of that gel pen marks all over the place. A little dot, a little line, a little curve. It just looks weird. So as a colorist, you should anticipate where your highlights are going to be and kind of plan for it. So I sharpened my white pencil so I can get those highlights around the mouth that I wanted to get. And that's sometimes people's style. That's what they do. They add highlights to stuff. Whether they exist in real life or not. Not that this character exists in real life or anything like that, but I decided to just go ahead and add a little bit of highlights here and there. They're a little subtler, and they seem to work. So one of the places that you can add highlights to the lips is around the edges of the upper lip, and then on the bottom lip, where it curves the most and would catch the light, I would add like little lines because the lip is not perfectly smooth. Okay, so I'm adding a little bit of the, just so that the smirk is a little bit more pronounced. I just add a little bit of the dark lines to mesh with the other lines. And then I add a little bit of the red so I can get more of the shape of the upper lip. And then also to emphasize that highlight. See, now the highlight's coming out a little bit more than it was before. So right there is a good place to put highlights. Um, in between, like the lip, if you like either side, either the top or the bottom, if you throw like a little line of darkness and then bring it back to light, kind of like how how you would do a sphere. It gives more roundness to your lips, and I try to do a little bit of that on there. Okay, and I was just I'm glad you couldn't hear that. I was ranting about all the black that's on here that is just like that. It's like, this is mine. This is my real estate. So I'm going over the white, just so I have myself going over the black with some white, so I can give myself a little bit more real estate. You know, take back some of the stuff that's supposed to be mine. So I'm going to be adding, once I get a nice coat of white on there, I'm going to be adding the red on there, and I'm going to do that around different parts of her costume as well, because I'm like, I could be doing something else with this. Why did they do this? Why did they do this? So instead of it just reflecting black, I'm having it reflect a little bit of red instead. Instead of it'll be like a deeper, darker red than black all the way around her lips. And that's what I'm pretty much doing there. And then I'm going to go around and add a little bit of red, but I'm pointing at different places on top of the costume where I'm going to be adding more colors and stuff like that. I'm going to start dipping into this black here. It's just unnecessary to have so much black on here. Let me stop whining, because it looks good. It looks good with the black, but it would look equally nice with an additional darker color in its place. There we go. And then I was even thinking of putting some green on there to make the red stand out just a little bit more. And green is the red's complementary color. And I just worked that in with some little circles. And I still hadn't used the blending stub yet. I had noticed that I hadn't used it yet. I'm like, okay, maybe I don't need it. But then I'm like, you know what? Let me use my blending stub, because that's what I do. So I decided to go ahead and add just a little bit of red, just a hint. Just to give a little bit more warmth to her face. And this is the area that in between the jaw and the chin it's pretty washed out, but I can tell that it's like a peach tone. So what I do is I add white, a little bit more white to it, and then I'm going to add like just a little bit of peach to it as well. And it just shows that that she has definition to her face. and I had like some sort of weird smudge on my source image. Um, it could have been from the oils or whatever. And I was like, you know what? She would look cute with a little dimple. So I threw a little dimple on there, just a little indent. And then I just start to darken some of the areas that are peach down there. When you're coloring something super light, or that's going to be light, you want to go ahead and if you think you have like too heavy of a hand, that it just comes out like a big god, throw some white down there, and that'll lighten it up. So, you're kind of helping yourself on that. Alrighty, and I'm just doing a once over of the entire face, thinking of where I might want to add more color, per my source image. But like I said, my source image is really washed out. Well, she's not that washed out, but she's very super light-skinned. And I figured it works pretty well for a Catwoman character to have light skin. I mean, she's out at night, so she's not getting a moon tan of some sort. She's going to be pale. So I'm just adding a little bit of color around her eyes, coming down towards the nose. And just think of a round. Think round in this particular sense. If you can picture a sphere, I'm pretty much working with kind of like a sphere, cylinder type shape when it comes to her face. Like the line that's right beneath her eyelid or her eyelash down there, that's where her actual cheekbone is. So I'm trying to blend upwards to that line. And then working back towards that pink. And I just got to make sure that the front of the her cheeks aren't as dark as the side of her cheeks. But I also want them to stand out some. So I go a little bit darker, just adding a couple more layers of peach, and I may go back over with some pink. In the area right above her lip, between her lip and her nose, it's really light right now, but I see that it's about the same tone as that part of the jaw I was talking about. So I try to do the same thing. I try to just really lightly add some of the peach in that area. It's like a super, super whitish peach in that area. And I'm trying to avoid that little highlight that I put right above the lips, where it bends, where the lips kind of curve a bit. Just keep going one more time through it. It's very, very subtle. And then I'm just trying to emphasize that highlight again where it's above her lips. Yeah, it's very, very subtle. And then I used a little bit of salmon just to bring out that color just a bit. I don't want to give her a mustache. So I lightened it up a bit, just a little bit. But, you know, I think Catwoman can rock the whiskers if she wanted to. And so I go back under other areas, um, simply because I don't want them to be too washed out from, you know, too much peach on it. So I'll be going back over some of the shadows on her cheekbones just to make sure that they are still as bold as they are in my source images picture. And it just adds a little drama to it. Now, I am using what is it called? Sandpaper, like a sandpaper block. It has little sheets. But I also invested in some regular sandpaper, you know, some that you can just pick up at Walmart. And I just rip off little pieces of that, and I use that to clean my blending stumps. You want to go in with a clean blending stump on the face, and it's fair game on shadows and whatnot elsewhere. But the face, I want to keep that like immaculate. Because if I get like a blue tone or something like that on her face, it can look like a bruise or something like that. Not that that'd be a bad thing, you know. Sometimes you get into those tussles, but you want a clean blending stump. I have some blending stumps, and that's what they look like. Blending tortillons, and they come in a pack of 10 at Walmart, about maybe $2 or $3 for a pack of 10. Really reasonable. And you get all different sizes, from really thin ones to some that you can use on you know, small areas. And that's pretty much what I do. I saw somebody, what was she doing? Sharpening it with a sharpener. And I'm like, no. I'm like, oh my goodness. But, you know, you can only scream at the screen so much. And then I have a brush that I had picked up when I was in college, and put it away, didn't think about it, found it later, and now I use it religiously on anything that may give me dust on my pictures. Okay, now I got a clean stump, and I think I'm going to start with the bright parts first and start blending those in, and I'm just softening up the tones. I'm not pushing really hard, and it's just softening up the tones a bit. And with baby oil, you can see that baby oil is like really super smooth. It just makes it like butter. It just flows. But the blending stump does pick up some of the colors, so you'll find that after you've worked it in and mixed your colors together with your blending stump, you'll find some of it onto your stump. So that's why I clean it when I'm in like areas like this. And once I get my light areas together, I come back into the dark ones. That way, and I also use like when I also mix my colors. So like if I'm adding blue to one side and I want to add kind of like a bluish tone to another, I would take that blending stump and add it maybe into the shadows or something, just so that everything has like a cohesive color to it. It's another thing that you can use to enhance your style, deepen your shadows a bit, and make them a little bit more unique. But on her face, I think I'm just going to go ahead and keep it nice and clean. And so I'm just gently working it in, and it just blends the colors nicely on this paper. Really nice. So if you do decide to try this, coat your entire paper with baby oil. Let it sit for an hour. Get a blending stub. And what's even cooler is that you can use your fingers to blend as well. You don't want to, because it's just like, oh, my big finger. It helps you to at least get the stuff down, especially if you're doing large areas. And I'll show you when I start to use my finger, because my big paw decided it was going to rub across something and leave a residue. And I'll tell you about that when that happens. Okay, so I'm just working things in. It looks like I lost my dimple there. That's okay. But your blending stump will pick up anything and everything. And when the paper is this slick, it's going to pick up everything. So whatever you put down, make sure that's what you want. If you want colors to start to merge into each other so they kind of look kind of seamless, you know, it's just that once you have your stump and you start rubbing, you got to have some really good control to make sure that it doesn't go anywhere. So you kind of want to pick the right stump for the right size. Make sure it's clean, along with your white pencil. If you're lightening up a darker area, make sure that you wipe off the tip of your pencil. I'm notorious for wiping it off on my shirts and my shorts, because I know it's going to wash out. Okay, now this is my source image. Way down at the bottom was Anya, and I'm sorry that I brought this into Movie Maker, so you probably just only caught a glimpse of what Anya looks like. But I use a lot of her shadows and things like that. I apologize that I didn't raise it up high enough. It's like, I could see it. Oh, that was totally unintentional. Okay, there's a quick glimpse, and she's upside down. Very useful, Kim. Very useful. Alrighty. The sad thing about using a GoPro camera is that there's a bit of her, and she's upside down, so which helps us in no way, shape, or form. But you kind of see what I'm working with, upside down. It could be any face, as long as it's in the right direction, kind of the same age, gender, and that makes a difference. If you use a man's tones or whatnot to do your, now I'm looking at her neck. Basically, I'm going to use the same kind of tones that I did on her neck. It'll be dark at where the mask is, head part mask is, and then it'll come down to really light. And I'm like, oh, what would be cool is if I had the bat symbol and reflecting in her goggles. And I was like, fangirling on that crap. And then I'm like, okay, I got to figure out what colors I'm going to be making the goggles. And my biggest frustration with it all is that no matter where I go, it's kind of hard to find the right outfit. I want to be able to correspond my outfits and whatnot together. Eye colors, hair colors, things like that with the actual character. Because God forbid I care. But I took a moment to look up Catwoman's And you know, and as you use your tortillon or blending stub, it's going to rub off some of your stuff. So what you want to do is, after you've used it, give yourself, your eyes, a second to kind of adjust, and then go back into the areas that were darker, things that you were trying to emphasize, because I had lost a bit of that sharp shadow that was underneath her cheekbone, that crest. So I'm adding it back in, and you can tell on her mask that's where her cheekbone is, and that's where the shadow is going to be. So I'm like, oh, how convenient! I should have used this sooner. So it works with me. It works. It works. Okay, so right now I'm just going to be adding those shadows in, and once I'm done with the face, this is going to be part one. Once I'm done with this face, I'm pretty much going to do some research on what the rest of her costume is supposed to look like. Is it a black costume? Is it a purple costume? Is it black with purple highlights? Things like that. And again, I'm trying to figure out where the light's hitting it the hardest and stuff. So it's safe to go ahead and do a little bit of color play right here underneath the goggles. Emphasize that those sharp cheekbones. And gray is really good too, if you want to darken up your browns. I like blue when I'm darkening up a brown, but gray seems to add a little something as well. Taupe would have been great for the shadow beneath the cheekbone going down towards her jaw, but this seems to work too. And I'm just blending it gently. And when I find that it starts to dry, I just add I just dip this into some oil, the tip of the blending stub into some oil, and wipe it off just a little bit so you don't have splotches of oil. And that also helps to move the colored pencil as well. Alrighty, so like now I'm just taking a peek at what's going on, and I'm blending certain areas in, trying to be careful not to pick up other areas, and giving her a mustache. Okay, and I still need to do the neck. So I decide I'm going to brighten her nose up just a little bit, just to give it a little tones. The nose and the ears, they are very thin, and blood goes to them a lot, as it should. No, but it's thinnest where the membranes and whatnots are. That's why you see red noses, or reddish, or noses that have more color to them. You'll see that with a lot of fair-skinned people. It could also be a sunburn as well. So it's also a nice way to brighten up your picture a bit. So I add a little bit more red. I wanted to give more emphasis to the curve of her nose. Like the tip of her nose is a ball, so I play on that like I would if I was doing a sphere. Where it's dark in one spot, it'll have a corresponding light on the opposite of the darkest part of the sphere. They're always opposite each other. Then I add a little bit more red to her cheeks. And everything here is just like, I don't want to say it's fussing with it, but it's just giving a little bit more emphasis to the face. And all these efforts make it look less flat. You always have to think in terms of roundness, or else your pictures will look flat. See, the nose is a ball. Or it has, yeah, so I start to just emphasize that just a little bit more. And I give a lot of detail to the face. I figure that if it has a beautiful face, it'll inspire me for the rest of the picture. And it also kind of sets the tone. You know, if she's got an ugly face, it's like, you'll give it a couple seconds, like, yeah, it's okay. But if you've taken the time out to make it look round, give her shape, especially if the picture is flat. You've seen the beginning picture. Now she's got some depth to her. She looks human. Not that she didn't look human before, but she's got roundness, curves. So on the next picture that you do, find like a People magazine. If you have the patience to use your phone or your computer, look for a face going in the same exact direction that your person is working with. If they're, got that 3/4 look and their mouth is closed, they're female, they're looking down or looking, you want to get something that is close to, or as close as you could possibly get to the shape of your face. And you'll be able to use that source image tones. How do they look? If you're going to do a person of color, find a person of color, whatever the nationality is. See if you can find one with the same expression, because if you have a different expression, it's going to change the face. It'll change your face almost completely. Okay, if your mouth is open, your shadows will be different than if your person their mouth was closed. In some cases, if they're in a weird light, if they're not in like a bright light, you can also get different effects as well. Unfortunately, when I did it, I got some really bad effects. It was sad. One day I might have the guts to show it off. Oh my gosh, I don't know. I didn't use colored pencils. I used crayons, and it just, oh my gosh, I want to gag. But anyway, but try to find a photo, a source image. Definitely has to be the same gender. It doesn't have to look the same, but it helps to have the same, as similar as you can possibly get. Take what you want from that to make it work in your picture, and then add to it if you want to. Give them freckles, give them scars or black eyes, whatever you want to do. Your source image is just that. It's just a source image. It's not meant to be taking exactly, because there's no way I could make Anya look like Catwoman look exactly like Anya. But her features worked for this particular character. Okay, so with the neck, I am adding some peach and some brown, maybe even some tan. I'm using the dark brown in some of the spots. If you need to darken up your image kind of with a little bit of subtlety, go around some of the edges. Like I made like around this collar, going down towards the collar, there is the popped up collar. I go all the way down towards the collarbone. Collarbone has a curve to it, so it wouldn't be just a straight line going down. So you got to kind of think of the contours of the body as well when you're doing your coloring. And when you're adding your shadows. Because you also have to think that it's not a flat image. This is covering something else. So that's going to cast a shadow. Or it may have a gap between the skin and the clothing. That's another thing to keep in mind. And I use my blending stump, and the blending stump was picking up all of that stuff. It was picking up the shadows that I put down. I didn't mean for it to do it, but it does. But it seems to work. You just go back over it. If you make a mistake, just go over it a couple times with your colored pencil. Sometimes you might, like I found with crayon, that if I added a white crayon over something and just kind of did layers of the color that I meant to do. So like if I needed something blue to become red, I put white over it like I did for the lips, and then layered it with red, put another set of, put another coat of white on it, heat it up, and then, and then just keep layering it that way. That might be a way to correct your mistake. Another way is if you got like a smudge or something like on it, you could take your blending stub, dip it in oil, and see if you can rub it out. You can at least rub it out till it's faint, but you can't erase. You won't be able, and I tried to erase a little bit. I think you might be able to erase a little bit of it with a white eraser, but I don't recommend it. I would find a way to either work with the whatever the error is, and I do make a boo-boo on something. I call it out and I show you how I work with it. So we're reaching the end of part 1. Yay! And I'm basically just filling in her chest. I am making the neck darker than the chest area, partially because the neck is usually darker, because the head is casting a shadow of some sort. This one because it was in my source image. So you wanna stick with, if you pick a source image that has a color or a light going in one direction, you want to go ahead and stick with that lighting source direction that they're using as well, or else it'll look funky and wrong if you have the light source going in one direction and then you have a whole nother one in another direction. You can get away with that if you give it a different tone. So like Hulk, he's green and yellow, and on parts of his body I would highlight in blue, symbolizing that there's a blue light coming from one direction and maybe a purple light or something like that coming from a whole nother direction. And then you can get away with having those two different light sources. So it's a thing to keep in mind. Alrighty. So at this point I'm going to take a break, look for Catwoman outfits, and try to pick the one that's closest to what we're working with. And I will see you in part 2. Thank you so much for hanging out with me up to this point, and I hope that this gave you an idea of what you can do with baby oil in a face. Like the whole paper is coated with baby oil. This is what she looks like so far. And I am right now just trying to find out if she's blue, purple, or is it just supposed to be black or white? So not that you can see off of my phone, because I'm trying to show what I'm looking at, what I'm working with, and whatnot. But you'll see what I come up with in part 2. And if you'd like more tutorials or more advice on how to color a face using a source image, let me know. I'll have a video where I set up a face, my source image face, and the picture that I'm working with, and have them side by side so you can see exactly what's going on. All right? Okay, well, thank you for watching. Thanks for hanging with me, and I'll see you in part 2. Bye-bye.